Earlier in the year, President Trump slashed aid to Yemen, a country facing mass famine and death, struggling to contain the coronavirus as war rages in the country. It's a proxy conflict between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and the Saudis are backed by us, the United States, because Trump vetoed Bernie Sanders's and I believe Rand Paul's bill trying to end our funding, and the Saudis are bombing the nation at will as we strip Yemenis of aid. 80% of Yemen's population depends on humanitarian aid. It's the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. It's sociopathic, psychopathic, whatever to take aid away from Yemen right now. I'm going to show you some footage of what's happening in Yemen. Fair warning, it's incredibly disturbing, but these children that are starving and sick, that's because of the United States' actions.
Hunger is ravaging the young of Yemen. Only the most critical are taken in here. There are just far too many children to care for. And this is what malnutrition does to a young body. It strips it down and opens it to infection. Anxious family members wait outside. Many have spent the 6 years of Yemen's civil war running from the fighting. The country is devastated, and it's the children who are paying for years of political inaction.
I would argue that inaction is precisely the wrong word for it, as I mentioned earlier. This is happening because of the United States funding this Saudi-led intervention. Because Trump, there was a bill that passed through Congress, bipartisan support, but not enough to override his veto. Because Trump wants to continue to be buddy-buddy with MBS and the Saudis, and continue that business-like, crazy, unethical relationship with the Saudis, because they want to control Yemen, and Iran is shadowily backing the Houthis, the rebel group that has taken over major cities in Yemen, and that's where this proxy war begins. Yemen is caught in the middle of these two large nations, Iran, which is Shia, and Saudi Arabia, backed by us, to control influence in the region. And we've decided, because we're on the side of Israel and we're on the side of Saudi Arabia and we have a financial relationship with them, we've decided that it's very important for us to continue to fund a genocide based on those principles, those core American principles of helping out Saudi Arabia and siding with them and Israel. It's just absurd. Our involvement in this region, I don't think gets talked about enough. I'm guilty of it as well. It's a constant atrocity that it's hard for me to remind myself of. And really, what it gets at the core of is the United States' sick obsession with thumbing its nose at Iran and being the aggressor in that relationship that has been exacerbated by the neocons of Pompeo, Bolton, who's no longer there, and Trump, who, in his speech at the Republican National Convention, talked about how he was ending the wars. We're funding a genocide in a proxy battle between Saudi Arabia and Iran right now. Right now. Do you think most Americans are on board and care and want to starve children in that region? Do you think any of them know or care or want? But this is what the national security establishment does all the time. They prey on people's ignorance because the media doesn't cover it. And it allows them to do whatever they want and commit atrocities at their own pace and at will and do whatever they want in that area. And Yemen is one of those instances. Congress is urging the State Department to reconsider U.S. assistance to Yemen suspended by President Donald Trump's administration earlier this year after a plea from humanitarian groups last month appeared to fall on deaf ears, redoubling attention on years of U.S. policy missteps in the war-torn country. In a letter to Secretary of State Mike Pompeo provided to us, FP, Foreign Policy, a group of more than 50 Democratic lawmakers led by Representative Ted Deutsch of Florida, who chairs the Middle East Subcommittee of the House's powerful Foreign Affairs panel, called on the agency to restore $73 million in aid halted in March over U.S. fears that Iran-backed Houthi rebels were seizing control of the aid and stopping distribution. So they're worried about the distribution of aid. They want it to be distributed, so they halt it altogether, sure. Lawmakers said that the move has only worsened the humanitarian disaster in Yemen, where the majority of citizens face deepening food insecurity and which is struggling to stop the spread of the coronavirus. Lawmakers cited worries that airstrikes by the Saudi-led coalition fighting the Houthis have destroyed many of Yemen's medical facilities and that escalating fighting has caused additional displacement of civilians, problems that threaten to get worse as United Nations-led peace talks have stalled. Democratic Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York is working on a companion letter to Pompeo in the upper chamber, a former U.S. official familiar with the effort said. Good for her. But Republicans have refused to sign on to either effort, seeing the push to restore U.S. aid in Houthi-controlled areas as a red line, according to a House aide, though Democrats remain hopeful that Pompeo will consider restoring assistance if it is tied to diplomatic progress. So Republicans are just admitting it there. They don't want aid in Houthi-controlled areas, which is a significant proportion of the country. And do you think if this was humanitarian aid and not being used as some sort of sick bargaining chip, would you care who this food and medicine went towards? Who gives a damn if the food and medicine is going to people who are ideologically aligned with Iran? God, imagine being this sick and this invested in a conflict like this. And who has influence in what region and who. Both Saudi Arabia and Iran are led by people who commit atrocities regularly, and Saudi Arabia likely commits worse atrocities. And you know who also commits atrocities? The United States. There's no morality involved in this, and they pretend that there is all the time. We're going to pretend we have the moral position internationally when we're funding a genocide and then say, oh, it's actually for the greater good that we back Saudi Arabia and their presence in this region so they can install whoever they want to lead Yemen. That's the greater good? By funding a genocide and killing children? And we're going to have the moral superior complex when we're talking about foreign policy and U.S. spreading democracy. We're spreading genocide and mass death. That's what we're doing.